Good day, everyone, and welcome back to the studio. So I wanted to do a fun little project with you today for Christmas, obviously, because it is the season. So I just have this cute little house that I want to paint with some snow on it and some cute little trees and things around it. So I'm using my Mungyo palette today, and it's the 24 color. I really love these pigments. But I also, as you could see in another video, which I will link to, I added some half pans down the center because I realized that they fit. And so why not? You don't need this many colors. Seriously, you can absolutely stick to a limited palette and get away with it. And I will be doing a video on color mixing in the very near future. So if you like my content and you want to learn more about color, please subscribe to my channel. So I did do, and this got really messed up, so I'm going to end up redoing it, but this is just a color swatch of the standard Mungyo palette, and then on the back I put the other colors that I added, and I also added a Payne gray because I just can't live without that color. It is too handy to tone things down, desaturate things, add shadows, glazing, whatever. It's my favorite color ever. It's just way too useful. You will be able to access the drawing on my website. The link will be in the description. And yeah, so let's go. So I do want to say one thing. I hear often from students or people learning how to paint that they don't have the same colors as their teacher, and that kind of blocks them from things. Don't worry about it, especially with stuff like this. Like, it's really not gonna matter. I think the important thing to kind of understand is your overall color palette choice. So complementary color is always winner. I'm going to be doing this in sort of a complementary color palette. So in the snow, I'm going to be using like blue grays for the shadows, and then in the house I'm going to be using warm orange and red colors. So that's going to be basically an orange blue complementary palette. And whatever colors you use within that, it's up to you. I don't ever want anyone to feel stuck because they quote unquote don't have the same color as their teacher. Really not important. For the brushes I'm using today, I've got another one. One of these I stole from my acrylic collection, but that totally works. These are the Nobel brushes. I actually quite like them. They're not the most expensive on the market. I'm just taking an angle brush, half inch because I'm working small. And then I've got a Nobel round, 5.0 round, just for some detail works later. And then I've got my favorite brushes ever, my soft aqua. I use the 3.0 the most. The O I use for obviously larger paintings or bigger spaces, but these keep really nice tips on them, and I just love the way they hold water and deposit my paint. This one is just one I got from Amazon. I don't even know from where now. I can't find them, so they're just in my collection, but it's basically just a rigger, and I think Nobel has some, but any soft sort of rigger will do, and I just like the fine point. So I probably won't use that today just because if I'm looking at the painting I probably won't need it, but I always just have it on hand. I also always have on hand just an extra piece of paper to test color mixes and whatever, just because, you know, we don't always get things exactly how we want them the first time, and we might as well just test. I'm also a big fan of keeping things very simple. So I'm not using any masking fluid today. I'm just going to be using paint and water, so hopefully you'll have that on hand at the very least, and we can get started. So let's just start maybe with the snow, just because it's sort of an easy place to start. So I think I'm going to mix up a little bit of maybe some like cool Prussian blue, just because it's a nice cool color, and like a little bit of my Payne gray, because I don't want it to be too green. So that's a pretty nice color, actually. Pretty happy with that. So a little bit more, because I didn't put that much out on my palette. I think you can cover your palette in Oxgall, and it stops it from beating up like this. But see, okay, now that's not enough Payne gray, so I'm just going to add a little bit more back in there. There we go. Still maybe a little bit intense, a little bit more Payne gray in there. Every once in a while you may hear my dog snort. Little bit more Payne spray. I went a little bit heavy. So that that Prussian blue is quite pigmented. There we go. So that's sort of the color that I wanted. It's a little bit cooler than my Payne's gray, but not too green. So that's pretty good. So I'm actually just going to take a fair amount of water on my dry paper, and I'm going to head right in here and just a little bit more water. That wasn't quite enough. And sometimes I'll mix on the paper like this too. I'm going to start in the shadowed area. I just used a regular pencil to draw this out. And I'm just going to kind of drew in where the shadows were going to go. Give a little bit of roundness in the corner here. So some people start with like an overall wash, but I just felt like starting with the shadow today. Sometimes I do that. It's partly because I want to preserve the white of some of the paper for the actual lighter part of the snow. Fill some of this in over here. See if I can keep talking. It's one of those things where my brain takes over and I'm concentrating, and then it's difficult to continue talking. So that needs to be lighter, this little edge. I'm going to actually leave that little space there because I don't want to go overkill on it. I'm going to let some of the paint off my brush, and I'll add a bit more water in a couple of minutes. But I just want to add a little bit more of this sort of darker blue in here. And this is an Arches hot press paper today. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. I tend to use a bunch of different papers. I like them for different reasons, so you'll see me switching between papers in my tutorials and in my videos, and I'll explain sort of why as I use them or choose them. For this one, it's just, I knew I wanted it to be kind of like a lot of washes, simple washes. So I find that the Arches paper handles that fairly well, in the texture, and the fact that it has 100% cotton content really helps with that. So it's easy to layer nice washes on this paper. Sometimes I use a hot press because I want to do more fine detail stuff and I want sort of a smoother application, so then that's sort of better for my details. In terms of the drawing, I just used a regular pencil. I will say I didn't erase it. There are things called I think they're Aquarelle pencils or something. They're designed to disappear when you wet them with the watercolor completely, so you can draw it out, your drawing, but then you won't see it when you apply the paint. But sometimes I like to see that drawing, and in this case it's just a cute little illustration, so I just kind of decided to keep it. I'm actually going to add just a little bit more blue to this, just to brighten it a little bit, just like bring a little bit more green in here, and really watered down. I want something very light now, and I'm just going to kind of add maybe some more green colors over this, and we can actually add in some of the highlighted areas. We can go and add also some warms later, some like maybe soft pinks or wherever the light is maybe hitting or carrying through. Maybe some purples, just to sort of give some variation. And I can go, so since this is dry, I can go right over this shadow. Sometimes when you put your water above your painting, you drip, and if there's color in there, it can stay, and that looks super not pro. So I'm actually just gonna take, I usually keep like something on hand, just to kind of, like a paper of some sort on hand, just to kind of protect that a little bit. And so I'm just adding this lighter color. I like to start sometimes in areas where it's just kind of loosey-goosey and big washes, just because it kind of warms me up, to be honest. It's like anything, you're better when you're warmed up. So if you start in areas of your painting that are sort of, in a way, less important or less detailed or just less challenging, you're gonna do a better job overall. So I always just kind of try to pick an area that's a bit less challenging like that. So I'm just letting this go a little bit lighter now in here. I do want some variety of values, so it's basically, I just have way more water in my brush and way less pigment. It's nothing more magical than that. Nice and simple. And again, I'm just taking it right off my paper there. I've tested the color, I've got a little pile, so I know it's not going to be too intense. I'm kind of testing it as I go. So the house is going to be darker behind here anyways, so I can clean up those lines if they're not clean enough for me. Around these little, I'll go in with a finer detail brush for those little icicle edges. For now, I just want to get the snow in. Little shadows, some icicles. Pretty cute. And I don't mind some hard edges in there. I'll take a little bit more Payne spray. So if you want less hard edges, you can just do a wash first of your light color. And then when the paper is still a bit damp, you can go into it that way after. And it will just kind of help spread things out a bit. I'll just put a little bit up here. A little bit of a mound of snow there, I think, just kind of piling up. Alright, so I think I'm going to just add like a bit of warmth, just a very slight amount of warmth to this. Actually, oh, I've got my smalt blue. No, that was too green. This is the smalt blue, I think. Alright, so it's still desaturated, but it's a bit warmer. It's less green. So I'm just going to add that into some of these little areas here that are still in shadow. That was a little bit much. I'm just going to take my brush and just wipe some away. And I may even add just some hints of pink after. Just a little variety of color within that. I do want to leave some areas that are white for the absolute highlight. just to add some color variation. We don't want the same color all over, it's kind of boring. So I'm going to actually take a little bit of this pink now. Just a touch, very, very small touch. Quite washed out. Just warming up some areas. And because this house is warm, there's going to be sort of some bounce light on some of the snow. And that's partly why I'm adding some warmth, because the house itself is going to be casting sort of a warm glow onto some of the snow here. And we can turn the lights on inside the windows, and so we can even add some hints of yellow on some of the snow, or oranges on the side that's facing the house. Alright, so let me see, what can we do next? Let's say, let's sort of build some contrast. I'm going to take my color here, and I'm going to let it be quite a bit darker. And I'm just going to, still a bit wet. Come in here and start building up some of these shadows in this area. Now, this is one of the areas where I should maybe wait, actually, because that's probably still a bit wet down here, so I'm actually just gonna like pull back for a sec on this little area here, because I don't want it to bleed into that snow that I just did. That would not be good. So instead I'm gonna, let me see, and actually I'm gonna add a bit more Payne's gray to this. It to be a bit darker. I'm going to come in here and just add a bit of a shadow. And you can even take your small brush for these little ones. So you can add shadow and then wash over, you just wait till it's dry. I do sometimes like to do this sort of drawing, I guess, with my watercolor. Add a little icicle up in here. And I don't want that to be too close to the same color, so I'm just going to add some more Payne's gray to that, just to bring it sort of away from the greens in the roof. Add some in here. See, that's very dark, and if it's too thick, if the pigment is too thick, it risks moving after when you wash over it. So I'm going to sort of pull that out. Just so that if I wash over it later, it's going to stay put a little bit better. Let's see. My father was an architect, and when I was young, in my teens, he sometimes used to give me watercolor renderings to do of some of his jobs. That was always a lot of fun. I haven't done it in years, though. Kind of switched over to wildlife. And now with the computer, it's so much easier to do that in 3D. So now I do 3D rendering instead, and it's a whole lot faster. And the other plus side is that if clients make a change, it's really easy for me to go in and change it for them. I'm very quick. Imagine having to redo a whole painting because they decided they wanted to see it in white brick instead of red. Forgot to draw some little details over here. I'm just going to do that now. Maybe some little architectural details. They're kind of like, it's kind of like a little gingerbread house. So I feel like it should have some little cute details on it. The fun thing I love about watercolor is you don't need to be aggressive with it. You can really take your time and just kind of slowly work your way through it. There's no stress, and actually the slower you go, the more control you're going to feel like you have. You don't need to rush through it. It's just you need to plan some washes a little bit, obviously, because if you rush into some of the washes, they can kind of go awry, and also if you're not direct enough sometimes, so that's one of the challenges. You want your wash to be beautiful when you lay it down, so sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. But I just wanted to sort of start understanding or making up more clearly some of these little details around the roof, so I'm just gonna lay in some of these edges and where the shadows are gonna go. So I think the house itself is going to be like maybe like a nice soft, like sort of red brick, maybe like a mix between, let me see, definitely want it quite watered down to begin with. My first washes. I'm gonna add a bit of yellow to this, just a touch, but maybe like a Naples, so it's not too intense. Yeah, so it's kind of warmed it up a little bit, just slightly. And again, I want it to not be too dark from initial washes, so I'm just gonna use this off the paper. I want to keep it cooler than the light that I'll put in the window. It's maybe a bit too bright, so let's have some. So this is obviously going to be for the lightest part of the house, so I don't want it to be dark yet. I can go in and darken it later. Into where all the shadows and the ambient shadows, like the ambient occlusion shadows and stuff. I'll darken that after, but I just want to give the house sort of its overall warm brick or warm stone glow. And back in behind here, it's also going to be warm. It'll be darker because it's in shadow, but it's going to be warm. So I'm just going to lay that in there for now, so I've got some sort of background color going on. And then down in here also, Got some brick. There's some little trees here, just in front, like little decorative ones, maybe on a little table. And then I can't forget the fascia and the eaves up in there around that window trim. And I'm just using very simple wet on dry technique. There's really nothing complicated about this technique. It's pretty much as easy as you can get. Just filling in the page with the general colors. Get a little bit more water and paint on there. I think because I keep things illustrative, I don't feel pressured to do like complex, complicated technique with watercolor. I just kind of allow myself to make it nice and easy, and hopefully the drawing is interesting enough to carry the composition. And then obviously the color choices, and then like nailing the value and everything else. Side of the house over here. So I went dark enough with my drawing that I can still see through, but not so dark that it's gonna distract later. Roof kind of comes up there. Give some bounce light. I think that roof should be darker in there. And then I'll leave that for that. I'm gonna put some blue on that so that it's like shadow. And I'm just gonna maybe like pull some lights out through here a little bit. And I can't forget this upper part here. The little gable that sticks out should also be warm because it will also be in that same brick. Brick or stone. I guess there could be bigger stones. I could just hint at a few. We don't have to draw every single little brick. It'd be overkill for the style. Oh, and the chimney. I cannot forget the chimney. And then as I wait for this to dry, I'm going to paint my trees. I actually kind of have a couple perfect colors for this. I don't want to shock too much. So I've got the green, it's called Green Appetit, I think, from Daniel Smith. And I've got also a little bit of other green here that's a little bit more bluish, but not too much. So I don't want to go too yellow on this, or too warm into the reds, because it's really going to clash then. I need it to stay a little bit to the cooler side, but I think I'm going to mix those two colors just to get a little bit of variation. And again, I'm just kind of going light on this for now. I'm literally just trying to block in some color. And this one, I think I'm gonna watch the little balls that I have, the little Christmas balls that I painted in there. But I think I'm just gonna kind of dab the brush like this on the edges. So anywhere that I don't paint, if there's pencil, I can erase it. But the minute you put paint over pencil in watercolor, it is staying. So that's just a little thing to think about. If you want the pencil to disappear, and you want to be able to erase it, you can't paint over it. But I can just kind of hint at the edge. And then as I come into the center, I can fill it out. I'm gonna sort of draw right around this edge here because I want this to stay quite clean, and it'll help to bring out that silhouette of that edge. And just have some snow coming up over here. And I think I will actually take some of, let me see, Payne's Gray, my go-to color. It'll help tie it in with the rest too. Then I'm going to mix it in with some of this. So now I've got a darker, slightly more blue shade, and I'm just going to drop in some shadows. And I kind of like cauliflowers. Not everyone likes them, but I actually find them quite pretty. So I'm just going to let this sort of bleed into what would be the shadow side of this little tree here. And I can go back in and do brush strokes, but I'm just trying to establish some sort of shadows in there without working too hard. I don't want to overwork it. So again, I'm going to take some of my, because I just messed it up, I'm going to take some of my mix here. That's too much. Get some blues back in there. And perfect. So these ones are actually closer to the window, which is interesting. So I think I will allow them to be a little bit greener like this, because they're going to be receiving some light from that window. I might put like a little red present or something down in there. And since I want some texture, maybe I'm just going to take my handy paper towel and dab a little bit away, and I can build this up after, but it's just giving me some sort of variation in those trees there, which just makes them a little bit more interesting. You can use anything for that, by the way, guys. Like, there's sponges, and you could, I don't know, anything that you can find and grab with a bit of texture. No need to complicate life. I always have paper towel on hand, so I pretty much just always use paper towel. And I just let it sit for a minute, just to sort of let the color go in there. And then I'll take my little paper towel when I feel like it's sort of set and just dab away. And it already looks like little trees. It's perfect. We'll go back over. but I like it already. I'm going to add just a little bit of this sort of an in-between color between those two, and maybe make this one a little bit darker. A little bushy thing here. I kind of drew a little shape in. It's always fun in architectural rendering to do all the landscape painting. Little plants and things, little flowers, leaves. Brings everything to life. And again, this side is closer to the light, so I'm gonna kind of put some dark on this side and toward the bottom. A little bit more water. And while this is sitting, I'm just going to add a little bit of texture to that. Just keep it simple. And I'll go in with the brighter color. Oops, too much on my brush. It's going to be way too intense, but again, we know how to soften that. Just add a little bit of lighter color on the highlight side. And I can leave some little spaces. That's interesting. You don't have to paint everything. You can leave some little white dashes. I don't know if you hear that outside, there's something going on, so I do apologize for the banging. It might not be audible. So just kind of remove a little bit of that. And then on this side where it comes around the house, I'm just going to allow it to go a bit darker with some of my Payne's gray. That paint is still wet. I just added those to the palette like about an hour ago, so they're still really wet in there, so they're just coming off. They're coming out of there too easily. So this whole side I think I'll just throw it in shadow anyways. Right now I haven't really established so much my lighting. A little bit on the roof there, but in the snow there, but yeah, I haven't really gone ahead with my real lighting scheme yet. I'll let that sit for a sec, and then I'll just dab a little bit away to give that sort of randomized texture. Alright, so next step, I want to do the window. So I think actually, yeah, what I'm going to do on this, I'm going to take a very bright orange that's quite wet. And I'm actually going to use this to do a bit more sort of a wet on wet technique. So I'm going to come in here. I might need a slightly bigger brush. This one's a little bit big, that one's a bit, I need to buy some more. Let's see, I've got a few extra in here. So I'm going to take, whoops, that's the one I wanted to grab. Well, maybe I'll take my rigger here, because I'm going to get a precise edge, but I feel like actually a slightly fatter round brush would do. The one that I have is a little bit thin right now. I have a bad habit of grabbing my watercolor brushes and using them for acrylic sometimes, and they get a bit chewed up. It is not the best habit. So that's what happened recently. I'm just gonna wet this. And actually, I could probably go over those little crossbars there, but I do want the shadow to come from that area, so I'll paint those over after. But because I'm going to paint them darker and warm anyways, I don't need to be too careful around them. Alright, so now that this is all wet and colored with a base color, I'm gonna go in with like a nice hot, maybe this one a little bit. Yeah, that's good. It's like sort of a hotter, darker orange. And actually now I will take this little brush. And I'm just gonna drop it in around the tops and the edges, and just kind of let that do its own thing here. And let it be brighter in the center of the window and have sort of like a nice little subtle change of color and glow happening in there. Again, I'm going to take my rigger and some of that pure color. If you wanted to, you could even add a little bit more yellow in here. I'm just using a nice orange. You can use any orange. Again, I don't want you to say, I don't know what color that is and I don't have the same color as the teacher. Just pick an orange. Pick a bright, not too red, more on the yellow spectrum orange. Whatever color choice you make, it's going to be the correct color. I always feel really sorry for people when they come into the art store and they've got a list of materials for some class that they're taking and they can't find a color because it's, I don't know, hard to come by and no one has it in stock or whatever. And they've run around to 3 or 4 art stores and no one has it and they're frustrated, and we try to give them a color that's really gonna do the same job and they don't want it because it's not the exact one. And I'm telling you, you don't need the exact one. If it's, look for the undertone. So in this case I'm looking for an orange that's toward the yellow spectrum, not the red spectrum. So the closer it is to yellow right now, the better, because it's going to give the appearance of luminosity. And then I'll take some of this, and I could even like go farther red on some of these into the little corners. Oh, I don't want to go too dark. It's going to be in shadow a little bit anyways. And just kind of drop this in. And like if I wanted to, I could just make this a little bit more red, like a more toward like the blue spectrum red than the yellow spectrum. And because this should still be a little bit wet but not as much, so now I'm just playing with the amount of water on the paper. You can add a little bit of this in here and it's going to spread a little bit less far. but it's just going to add again some interesting color variations in that wash. There. It's pretty good. If this is too intense, don't forget we can let it sit for a second. We can always layer, so don't be afraid to remove some paint if you find it too intense. It kind of just lightens everything up and gives that little bit of interesting texture that I really love. The other thing about painting, people become really opinionated, I've noticed. And if you're a beginner, it can kind of scare you off. When you've got a little bit more experience painting and you've found your own methods that work for you, you're a little bit less easily swayed by all of the opinions out there on how things should be done. And while I think it's really important to keep learning, don't worry about being too swayed by how everyone else does things, because you might be on a path and it might be going really well, and then either you just like learn or see a new technique or a new style and you're like, oh, I want to paint like that, or you're persuaded by someone to work in a way that is not really how you work and doesn't feel natural for you. It can actually throw off your progress. So I think it's kind of important to just pick a way of working, or pick a teacher or a couple teachers that really kind of jive with where you're at and your style and sort of your own philosophy on how things work, and just follow them for a while. And then if you're then feeling like you could use some more info or you might like a new perspective on something, then go look for your other teachers and try new stuff, and then incorporate it into what you already know, so you don't sort of undo all of the personal progress that you made learning from one person or another. I know I took a really good acrylic class with David Longway. He's amazing. If you can find him and you're into acrylic, please take his class. He works in a way that is super interesting, and I did end up adopting a whole bunch of his techniques, but I don't do them the same way he does. I had another way of working that was sort of similar but also quite different than his way of working, and some things about the way he does it that's very natural for him just weren't coming natural to me, so I ended up sort of coming up with a hybrid method between the two styles. So the cool thing about that is I still learn a new technique from a new artist who's phenomenally skilled and absolutely knows what they're doing and has their own incredible style and technique, and I managed to take something very useful away without necessarily completely copying what he does, and it gives me a different result than what he was getting. So in the end, it means that even using sort of similar techniques, we've put it together differently than each other, so we end up with different results. And I think that's really important. So I think it's important to not sort of get swayed too much by all of the information out there. There we go. Lovely. Simple little glowing windows. Again, I'm going to do this one, kind of wet it, so we're doing the wet on wet technique here. I don't want too much water. This is probably too much. It's kind of like beating up, but I know that I can kind of lift some of that off. by just moving it over here. And I want it light anyways, as you know, so kind of avoiding. I'll end up cleaning up some of these edges later. They're going to be darker, so I'm a little bit less worried about going over the edges on those. It's when things are dark over light that we have to be a little bit more careful, because they will show up. So this is just letting me know that I need to buy a couple more paintbrushes. This is not the ideal brush for this job. An ideal brush would be just a slightly larger round, or even a small flat, honestly. Which I don't have a small enough flat either right now. I have a bad habit of mixing my brushes. I obviously don't do that with my soft aqua because they look very different than all of my other brushes, and they're more expensive and they're specifically for watercolor. So I do tend to leave those alone, but the rest of them I just kind of grab them if I need them. And I do tend to work in acrylic quite a bit more than watercolor, so. Alright, again, tiny little brush. Take my more orange, and I'm going to drop it in along those edges and let that kind of mix. Some cool little reflections and just variation of color. And then I'll take some of that darker mix that I made. And drop that in. And then again, I'm going to take my little paper towels and just bring back a bit of luminosity. Alright, so I like the direction it's going. It's a whole bunch to do still. I'm going to see if I can locate more brushes. So I'm going to take a quick break and I will be back in a couple minutes. So I managed to find a couple new brushes, so I've got this tiny little flat bright brush, also Noble, and then a slightly larger round brush, also from Noble, so this should help speed me up a little bit. They're a little bit rigid because I've used them with my acrylics, but they're fine. Okay, so at this point, I tend to start thinking about value. So I have sort of an overall color scheme established. And now I need to think about value because this is way too dark right now on everything, and this is actually going to be one of the lighter areas in the painting. Well, yes and no. It's going to be a lot lighter than the shadows of the house, so let me rephrase that a little bit. So we had this sort of pink color, and I know like in shadows on things they tend to cool. So I'm gonna see if I can mix up okay, so just got disturbed by a phone call, so back to where we were. I'm trying to mix like basically a cooler version of my warm. I don't want it to be too cool. I'm gonna desaturate it with a bit of paint spray. So that was too far, and now it's yeah, I'm gonna put a little bit more warm red. So I'm not loving that color, it's too orange. My house color has a lot more pink in it, but I do want it to have a slightly more brown cast, and I'm thinking that this might be a little bit better. Yeah, so that gives me something slightly more brown, and it is slightly, it's darker, slightly more brown, and slightly cooler. So I'm going to take some of this, and there's definitely going to be quite a bit of heavy shadow in here. And I'm just going to lay this in. And I'm going to be fairly aggressive about it, because what I want now is to, and I know that, oops, I know that this is going to be in quite a bit of shadow, so I'm going to lay this in quite dark to start establishing my darks. And there's like maybe a bit of an eaves in there, so I'm just gonna lay in and I'm sort of also imagining some bricks and things, or stone, so I don't need to be completely even about this. A little trim. There's usually little trims on houses where things change corner. I'll let that sit for a second, and then I'm going to add some more, but it's going to be sort of partially dried already. So it's going to add a little bit of variation. And I'm just going to pull this out now that it's set a little bit, and I did it while it's still a bit wet, because I want that to be soft, because it is in a shadow, and details tend to soften in shadows. Getting around those little trees. I'll probably darken some of those little branches after when I clean everything up. This side also is going to be in shadow on this chimney, so I'm going to lay this in now. It's going to probably be a bit brighter than the other shadows because it is getting more skylight. The other shadows are shadowed from the direct light, but also because there is ambient occlusion, so the little shadows that happen in the corners of things, so it will be, those shadows will be darker. This one too, it's going to be quite dark in here. Actually, this part will be quite dark because there's a lot of sort of actual direct shadows, but also a lot of bouncing sort of ambient occlusion shadows in there. So I will actually make an even cooler, darker version of this and drop it in here. And again, I can go darker with this stuff. I'm just at this point trying to get information down. So I know what direction I'm going in. This is a bit intense, this one. I think I'll cool it after, but honestly when we get the rest in around it, it might read okay. So I'm just gonna like hold off for a minute. Under this roof, there's gonna be shadowing happening. So this part is quite delicate here. I'm going to go in with my small brush in a second while this is still wet. And just go around and clean up around those little icicles. And that eaves, the fascia up there is also going to be casting shadow under it, so I can make that darker after. And you know, my little drawing isn't perfect, the lines aren't perfectly straight, but it kind of adds to the quirky little charm of this little, almost like gingerbread house. There's a little decoration in here. It's a little bit darker than the rest, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more water. Don't forget though also that watercolors do lighten as they dry. So that was still a bit wet, but that's okay. Or that was too dry a bit. That's okay, I'll just make it look like a little extra little gradient in there. Little arched windows, super cute, makes it nice and cottagey. And while that's still wet, I'm going to just work that into that. Bring it down around this tree. I'm just leaving a line here right now, but it's going to get darker in there too, so I just want us to see that there's something going on in here. So now this looks a little bit less out of place because this has become darker, so I'm actually going to add a little bit more in here. So that almost acted like a glaze there. I just added warm over it and it changed the tone or the color of it. The hue, actually, not the tone. The tone a little bit too, but mostly the hue. Okay, so I can actually take this color and maybe mix like a slightly different one out of it. And just down near the bottom area where the snow is, I'm just gonna add like a little bit of cooler. I actually want this to be quite light, so I'm gonna dab away quite quickly, but I just want sort of some shadows toward the bottom of the house a little bit without it reading too much like a shadow or like a block. Just want to anchor it to the ground a little bit. little bit of variation. Oh, there would be shadow under here though, because the windowsill. So I think I'll actually let this one stay a little bit more intense. And then even some up in here. But again, this part, I'm gonna let that just sort of wash away. Alright, and then down in here, so there would be a shadow also coming this way under this roof line. If the light's coming from the left, I think I'll anchor it down in here. But again, this one, I'm going to soften that up very subtly. Under here, there's definitely going to be shadow because of that sill, so that'll give it a nice 3D effect. And here, I'm going to soften that up a little, add some variation without being overblown. So if you do another layer, as you can see, it goes a little bit darker, but in a very soft way. So under this roof line, there's also going to be some cast shadow. It slowly starts to make sense. Watercolor is just one of those things where you have to build it up slowly, and it can seem kind of weird at first, especially when you haven't really established your values and some of your colors look a bit too intense or your values look a bit too intense. But as you keep working, you can keep adjusting. If ever you go way too dark on something that needs to be light, you can just sort of adapt the rest of the painting. It's not necessarily the best method, but you can always fix it. You just need to keep an eye on your overall plan and your overall intention. There we go. It's starting to look kind of interesting. I still feel like this is a bit intense, so I'm going to add some water to this and kind of scrub it a little bit, just very softly. Let that sit for a little second and then wipe it. That's a bit better. It was just a little bit much. So you can always lift. I don't want to work that too much. If I lift too much, it's going to look overworked. Alright, so next step. Let me see. Let's do some of these roofs. So I had a mix of Payne's Gray and that sort of more blue-green. And so now I'm going to come in here. This is a way better brush for this. So these are going to be quite dark. And I already have that wash there, so that's cool. And that snow behind it dried. Yeah, so this is a 1 round. And it's just kind of a more appropriate side for what I'm trying to get away with. Kind of forgot some details on the side, but that's alright. This is just fantasy. This isn't a real rendering. So this is going to sit off a little bit. And I'm just going to clean up that little edge, but that whole thing is going to get darker back there anyway, so. This little gable is kind of, some of it is sort of sitting in front and other things are going behind, so I'm going to have to work that out as I go. But I thought kind of a nice little, actually I might make it a bit warmer. I'm going to add some of my purpley blue to this just to differentiate it. Oops, that's the wrong one. Differentiate it from the house. I added the wrong loose, or from the snow. So there we go. This is the small blue. It's just a purple blue. You could use an ultramarine. And I'm going to add some Payne's gray to that, and even maybe some of that greenish. But I want a slightly different color for some of these trims. Way too much. I'm going to give it an overall color. So I guess all of the trims of the house, like the doors and the windows, I'll do it this sort of grayish purpley color. So I'll just get some color down. Just overall. And again, I want to add some variation to that, so I'm just gonna lighten. I maybe didn't let it sit long enough there. That's okay. Alright. Not too bad. There's gonna be some more snow sitting on top of here, so I'll just carefully leave that white. And see, because I have a color change from cool to warm here, we're seeing a differentiation. If I had have left that cool, like in the green tones, we wouldn't see that change, so it would be hard to read that area. So that's something that you have to think about too, and you can do that with value and temperature equally. So again, I want to leave area for that white snow there. And I know I'm not doing this with just like one perfect wash, but you don't always have to paint that way. It might stress you out more than anything. I know it stresses me out. I don't want to get it perfect the first time. I don't want to have that pressure. Alright, so I'm just going to add a little bit of soft variation in there. There we go, that really warmed it up. That's really nice. I really like this color. So I'm just going to match, as per usual, architecture stuff. I'm just going to match all of my fascias and window trims and decorative pieces to this warmer purple gray color. And you'll see also next to these oranges in the light in the windows, it adds a really nice contrast. So I'm just trying to get the overall color right now. I'll go back in and shadow things later and clean up my edges. And of course I waited for this to dry, the little windows, because if they had been wet, I would have gotten bleeding of this blue into the orange and it would have made a mucky mess. That's why I tend to work back and forth a lot on my paintings. I work back and forth so that I can allow certain things to dry while I move on to the next section, so I'm not blocked in the process. So if you wanted to, you could do little paintings like this to make Christmas cards. But I don't know about you guys, but I am busy and I don't have time to paint everyone Christmas cards as much as I would love to. So what I do is I take these little paintings after and scan them and then get them printed on a high quality paper, and then I don't have to do many paintings for my friends and family. I can do a few nice ones, spend the time that it requires to do a nice job on them, and then I can give those away for Christmas. Also, if you're wanting to sell your artworks, you can take those often to cute little artisan shops where they sell things on consignment, and they will often buy a kit from you in advance and then they sell them, so you can make a nice little sale and profit, and you don't have to do a whole bunch of original paintings. But on the right paper they look really nice, and they almost look original, honestly, on the correct paper. And I'm gonna do, this is probably where the roof overhangs a little bit. Everything's kind of covered in snow over here, so it's hard to see what's going on. Alright, so this is actually going to end up being quite a bit darker. So this is again where I'm going to have to come in and figure out my shadows. And I could even darken in here with some cooler color. And I could even use some of the paint from that roof area, because it will be creating a bit of a sort of bounce light effect. Alright, so my smoked blue here, it's freaking perfect, I love it. Oh, my paints are finally starting to dry. There we go, and some Payne's gray to desaturate that a little bit. It was just a little bit too saturated for my liking. I'm going to go under here. It's also going to be dark. There's maybe actually a little bit of brick showing, and it's going to be shadowed, so I will put that in after I clean my brush off with this. And actually this one, I think it needs some more light in it, so I'm just gonna dab that off a little bit. And since I still have a bit of this wet here, and I know it's my shadow brick color, I'm just gonna come in and add that underneath. And it's too warm, it's not reading like a shadow, so I will cool that off after. There's like little trims and eaves and things sticking off, so I'm trying to capture those right now. I'm gonna hint at some of the house coming across here. under these little icicles. And then again, I need to evaluate what's happening color-wise, and is it serving my painting? And so if I'm looking at this right now, the shadows in the brick underneath these eaves are much too warm. They're pulling forward. So I'm gonna have to go in and deepen those shadows underneath with a cooler color. So I'll let everything dry, and then I will do that basically with a glaze. So I'll just shift those colors right near the top here to be warmer, and I'll create like a new sort of gradation on there. And these are things that I'm just kind of constantly evaluating as I paint. I just keep asking myself if it's working, and if it's not working, why is it not working? And what can I do to sort of fix the issue? I need some more snow color over there, but I'm going to do that after. I'm not too worried about it right now. So this will be under those little eaves, and then there's like some little details and frill stuff hanging off of there. Little cute kind of gingerbread house. And this is also part of the roof here. I'm going to let this sit for a minute just so that it's dry when I go back in there. Just so I can have like an edge. Okay, I think it's okay. Just go a little bit lighter with it. I'll kind of fuzz it out that way too. It's not going to be as hard edged. And it does go around the side, so it's kind of better if it's a bit hard edged. Or soft edge, sorry. Soft edges will disappear. There's hard edges, soft edges, and disappearing edges. Or vanishing edges. And it's really good to be able to play with all of those in your painting. It gives like a nice amount of variation and interest to your compositions if you can play with your edges. Let's see, I've got some clashes right now with my values and my color right around this area. So it's good to evaluate, and it's totally fine at this stage. You just have to be able to recognize it and then have the tools and the knowledge on how to fix it. And that's where practice comes in, and taking classes and watching tutorials. Eventually you just sort of amass enough knowledge that you can easily recognize these things as you're working, because they always pop up and every painting is different. And then when you've got enough knowledge, you can evaluate and then pull out some of those tools from your knowledge toolbox and apply it to whatever situation you run into as you're working. And like, you can't plan out 100% every painting every time. There's always going to be things that come up. Even if you try to do the exact same painting twice, you're going to end up running into different problems. It's just guaranteed. It's basically a guarantee. Alright, so I think I'm actually gonna make this like a little bit of a stone decor around the house, and then I'm gonna add, oh, you know what could be cool, maybe is adding a slightly warmer, maybe a little bit of green too. A slightly more saturated front door. Maybe a little bit more green than this. That's way too much. Some of these colors are so intense. There we go, like a halfway between. Could be the house with the blue door. And I'm just gonna paint over the whole thing for now. Just sort of color it in, because why not? And then you know what I'm going to do next. If you've been following along, you know what I'm going to do next. I am going to take my trusty paper towel and dab some of that off. Subtle color. Add some of this here. Do a little like, I'm going to shadow in there anyway, so I'm not going to worry about that. I need to define around all of these things. But I just want to add like a little cute little sort of trim around this door here. Excuse me. And that's perfect. It's slightly more yellow than the other reds I laid down. So it kind of stands out as something slightly different, like a slightly different material than the rest. And I think I had, let me see, I'm just going to take a little bit of, I think it was this one. Yeah, just a little bit of this, because I think there will be snow on here as well. I might even just darken some of this a little bit. And maybe even saturate it slightly, just for fun. And maybe some up here, just where I want the shadows to be a little bit deeper and more intense. Hint at that round thing, that little rounded part of the snow, but then we can have almost like a disappearing edge up there. And if I wanted to, I could erase that pencil after we haven't painted over it, and it will give me a disappearing edge with the paper. Alright, so let me see. What's next? More shadows. So I definitely need, like we discussed, I need some more shadowing under my little roof line here. So I'm actually just going to use like a glaze basically of this Payne's Gray. And this needs to get quite a bit darker. So this is definitely where I'm starting to play much more with values. And I'm going to wipe some of this off and then just pull it down. So I added a bit too much water into it. I didn't rub it off my brush enough, so I might get a little bit of a cauliflower in there. But I think it's going to be okay. So this is going to help to separate those planes. And really give some dimension to that roof line while also sort of stopping it from competing in space. I think the colors were too close. But by doing this, I've cooled off those reds and darkened them, and they're now less saturated also, so now you can see the purple of that roof line there comes forward, which is exactly what I wanted. So it's really about knowing how to play with value and color temperature. I spent quite a bit of time when I realized that my paintings weren't good enough, and I evaluated why they weren't good enough. And I started with value because I had a bit of a problem with controlling my value in an interesting way and in sort of in like a design way. And then when I sort of felt like I had mastered that, but things were still falling a bit flat, I guess you could say. They just weren't really exciting to look at, and there were sort of issues with depth and other things. That's when I started playing a lot with temperature. And then so combining value and temperature will give you a really powerful recipe for enhancing your paintings and your painting skill. And then you don't even need to improve your drawing at that point. You're just controlling what's with the paint. Always improving your drawing skill will improve your painting, but it's not the only way. There are so many other things that you can master that will help immediately improve your painting skills. And mastering value and temperature are two of those things. So again, this is going like really far behind this edge here, so there's not a lot of light that's going to be reaching in here, so I'm just going to take my Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is my favorite color. It is so handy. I just don't think I ever want to be without it. I think I could do a full painting just in Payne's Gray and be quite happy. I just do a tonal painting. So as you can see, I'm sort of making this pop a lot more by just adding some shadowing and some cooler tones. I don't even need to detail it that much. So I'm starting to pick up some of that warm in there, which I don't really want. So I'm gonna mix a bit more of my smalt blue, but with more Payne's gray in it this time. It's just so that I can keep this in the color family that I want it in. And I don't want this to be too dark, and I still have to add some detail shadows, but I'm going to lay this in because I started. And then I'm going to dab away some of it with my trusty paper towel. Which has literally just disappeared on me. Okay, dab it away. I left it a bit long, but that's okay. Alright, the color's fine. I'm going to add some detail in there, so that'll be good. So underneath some of these areas, actually I might go in with a smaller brush after. So some of these ones, it's kind of like curving underneath, and then there's like a volume to this, so I'm going to add a little shadowed edge here, and then that's going to come up to that underside. So I'm just trying to imagine the structure and with the structure what the values would be doing. That's like a little square thing there. So this would be more in shadow. And then I've got some sort of decorations in here. Some of these little roofs on these old houses have some intricate little woodwork and stuff. You can just hint at them, I don't need to fully describe them. Alright, so again, you can see our problem. We've got this really warm house back here, and this should be in shadow. I don't know how far I want that to drop back. Let's see. I think I'll just drop it this way. Nice and shadowed. Need a bit more water there. This is the problem sometimes of mixing on a paper. Your paints run out of water. But I also find I get a large amount of control this way. I'm trying to carve out some dimension in here, some 3D forms. And you can just layer to get your shadows darker. Okay, so my windows, taking that sort of warmer color because I've got that purple blue in there, which could be ultramarine. I'm using a smelt blue. I've got like a little keystone thing here for like a little wood decoration, and then there's going to be a little line here. And down this side. I'll put a bit of shadow to give it some of that volume. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter on that amount of paint there with water, so there's a bit more water than paint. And I'm just going to soften this out and darken that inside corner. And I'm going to take some of the darker one now and shadow a bit on this side. And I'll take some of the warmer color and just add some of that ambient occlusion shadow where that window is just kind of sticking out a little bit. And again, I need it underneath where that's going to be blocking the light a little bit. And actually, since I've got some warmer color on my brush, I'm going to come in here and so this is now not dark enough because I just darkened the other shadow, so I've got a contrast of values happening that don't make sense, so I'm going to darken underneath here. I'm just imagining where light goes at this point. That was way too much paint. I do want to shadow on this side of that and the underneath part of this little decoration. And give it some rounded form. And it would be casting a fairly strong shadow into this area, so I can just, especially on this side, increase that shadow. Good, we're starting to get some volume. Love it. Underneath here, back into this corner, is going to be quite dark. And I'm cooling it just with that Payne's gray. A little bit of the purple mix actually, it's fine. Take a little bit of that warm color, a bit of the Payne's gray mixed in because it's still shadow, but I do want to add a little bit more shadowing down into here, but I want it to be subtle. This is too much right now. So I'm going to take my handy paper towel and dab it off. And it just gives, like, it almost just the rocks for me. Like, it's kind of great. You don't need to work too hard this way. And I need some more shadowing. Too much water on my brush, it's gonna drip off. A little bit more shadowing through here. So now everything starts balancing out, and it's really this balance that I'm looking for when I'm painting. And with watercolor, you start with your lights, and then you work towards your darks, which is really handy, actually, and I really think that everyone should learn watercolor for this skill. With oil paints, it's opposite. It's working dark to light. You have a really hard time darkening things once they've gone light. But I find with acrylic, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So I think if you're an acrylic painter especially, it's pretty interesting to learn watercolor technique because it really opens a lot of doors. I'm just gonna add like some sort of, I don't know what, under this table. Just like frilly decoration. And then this is gonna go darker because it's under a table. And again, I need some of this darker color because it's shadowed under there, and I don't want the warmth competing. I'm gonna take my darker blue color. So this is where I'm gonna maybe make this door a bit more interesting. So maybe a little decoration. So of course if this were actually architecture, I would be very careful to have things drawn in quite precisely. But because this is already like kind of cottagey feeling, and it's more of that like cute Christmas vibe, I kind of like the imperfection in the style. So I'm just gonna let that happen. Like my lines aren't perfectly straight and things don't necessarily make a lot of sense, but I feel like we don't need to care too much. It kind of adds to the charm of it. It's a bit more like folk style. Well, it's quite far from folk, but you know what I mean. I'm not like aiming for accuracy and realism here. I'm aiming for an overall feeling of warmth and Christmas joy. Alright, so there's maybe gonna be like an overall shadow. Definitely one under here. Kind of softens all that out. Okay, and then the little windows, I'm going to mix a little bit more of my blue into gray. So that I can tackle these little bits. Some of it's just working. I don't really have much to say, I'm just following the same steps. I'm going to leave it in the video as is for now, just with the quiet parts, but if you're still following along with me, let me know if you think it would be better that I just sort of speed up the silent parts, because I'm kind of just repeating what I'm doing, so I'm not really explaining. Or do you like that it's like quiet but still real time? I feel a bit pressured to keep talking sometimes, but you know, aside from like when I run into something or a question or that I have to ask myself or something I need to solve, I'm not really like, I don't really have stuff to say every time or all the time. Sometimes it's really just about like continuing to lay the paint down. So I will say one thing though right now. Making these darker will give the appearance that the light in the window is brighter. So I think I'm going to go back on these ones. Anyways, I didn't shadow here yet, but definitely by making a bigger value change in that area is going to give the appearance that the light in the windows is brighter, because it's effectively making those little cross beams there, it's effectively making them backlit. So I think I will do that. And I'm just going to darken in here a little bit just to give that 3D effect. And underneath here, so there's kind of like, this is angling down, so it's going to be darker. There's definitely some scale issues in my drawing. That's okay. This door is mini. My windows are massive. It's kind of cute that way. You don't have to be perfect every time with your drawing. Sometimes stylized drawing is more interesting, even. I used to be really stuck on realism and absolutely following references to the letter, and in the end I kind of felt like my works were looking both kind of rigid and boring. So I kind of just stopped trying to be fully realistic with everything. So you'll notice, I've so far done this whole painting with really not very many colors. You really don't need a lot of colors on your palette to do successful paintings. I have every color because I work in an art store, and that's literally the only reason why. I would not have bought all of these colors if I didn't have a discount, essentially. Just enjoying my discount. It's nice too because I can then advise clients when they come in asking questions, and for me that's quite important. So there's part of the reason why I am buying a lot of the supplies is because I'm product testing, and it's part of my job to product test so that I can advise people well that you don't need it. Like, I don't need all of the brands of paint. If it were just me, I would pick one and just use that. I like the Schmecke and the Mungyo palettes that I have. The Schmecke or Schmecke, I never know how to pronounce it, but I do love that brand of paint. So I'm just adding some little touches of red because it's Christmas, and that's how Christmas is. There's touches of red and green everywhere. And do some little gifts up here. So that's really intense. I'm going to remove some of that color. I don't need it to be too much in the beginning. If I go too saturated right away, there's no room to move, and it's going to contrast with everything else that I have established. So I'm going to go a little bit more slowly on building up these reds. I'm also going to add a bit of orange to the front of some of them. And then I can add more blue-red to the shadow side, because remember, shadows are cooler colors, or cooler versions of the same color. So I want to be able to create that variation in color and the look of variation in the painting, shadows and light. And little gifts there. Alright, so the stairs, I'm going to do just my little Payne's gray color. That's probably too intense to begin with, so I'm just going to remove some. Again, you go light to dark, so you don't need to go too dark on the first application. You're better off holding back and layering. I might take some of my yellow, but just a very subtle amount. That's too much, but I can remove some. I just want to add a hint of warmth to where some of that light might sit from those windows. Just to kind of warm the ground up there, and that white snow is going to catch some of that light there. Just on the side facing the window. That kind of adds a nice warmth to it, and we could do the same for maybe like up in here a little bit. Just add that soft glow. Just kind of add something really nice up there. And I'm going to add maybe a little bit more shadowing, just kind of down in here. And this side of the house. So I need some of this red color because this part, it's too bright and I need that to go backwards. Now you can see it's darker, but it's too warm. So I will cool that off on another layer by adding my Payne's gray to it. And we can do some fun little things like mix up a more saturated brick color. I need it to be a bit cooler than that. Ah, too cool. That's probably better. And I'm just going to add some sort of like little brick details. And I'm going to remove some of it because I don't want it to be too intense. Need some light to sort of read through there. And I'm going to go a little bit darker on some of these here. Kind of glaze over that. It's just a little bit bright compared to that shadow, and I want that to not stand out so much at the top there. And this one also, it's too bright up in here. Add some more variation to these windows. Running out of paint. A bit more water to this one, and I'm gonna randomly kind of dab this in, kind of look like reflections maybe, and then soften. I don't want to ruin all that work that I had previously done, but I do want some more variation in there. And up in here as well, I can soften the contrast. And on the side of the chimney here, we didn't really touch any of this, so I'm going to add some shadows, nice and subtle shadows. And just some brick details. And it's not bad. I'm going to take my Payne's Gray and add just some little details here. Little tiny little string. I forgot underneath the window, so I'm just gonna add that in. It's a little bit of, and I think that I need to add some shadow on that snow there also. That makes more sense. Looking for a warm color. Sometimes you can still pick out really small amounts of color, and I just kind of wanted a little bit of a warm shadow up there on that snow. And alright, so I've got like a little table here that's not really dealt with. I'm just gonna, I don't want it to be too obvious, so I'm just gonna paint it in a brown that's similar to the house. And then I'll shadow around it, just to give it some volume. But also I need to finish my little trees, so I had some of this green, some of this green, like a yellowy green and a bluey green, and then some Payne's Gray to give it more of an earthy tone. And I may even do a section with even more Payne's Gray. Sometimes I just like to move my brush a bit randomly over the surface of my page. I also look for details that kind of came out in some of my previous washes, and I like to use those to inform decisions. So sometimes the randomness of what comes out is much more interesting than what you would have decided as a person. Humans tend to do things in very balanced ways, and nature isn't predictable and organized and balanced. So sometimes I feel like it's good to allow whatever washes you lay down to dictate the shapes and things that you're laying down in subsequent layers. Like here I kind of have this area that looks like it's reaching upwards, so I'm just gonna go with that. It's too much paint. Let's soften that out. But then I do want to impose some structure on it, because I do know that I want that edge to read. I'm going to put like a little red ball here. So some things I do have to dictate in design. And I think I'll just sort of allow this to go a bit darker. And again, I don't want it to be too even, so I'm going to remove some of this to add that subtlety back. Splashed my paper, get rid of that before it dries in there. Just kind of random brush strokes, as random as I can get them. Okay, I don't want an over outline like this, but I do want that area to be darker, so I'm going to spread that out, because if that's outlined, it just looks really unnatural, and what I'm aiming for is just to darken behind that area so that it makes the corner of the house pop out. But I don't want it like an outline, because that looks completely unnatural. Let's soften that out a bit. Alright, so that's that little tree, and I'll do the same for these other little ones where there's going to be and like I said, because it's next to the window there, I think I'm going to add some more sort of yellow, brighter greens. Let me see. I'm going to pull out the bad boy. This one is really vibrant, but it's just going to add. Rosie, stop. So we're almost at the finish line with this one, I would say. I want to darken this area too, and then I'm going to darken my trees in accordance, because I don't want them to go too dark or be too bright. So I'm just going to mix up some more of my shadow color for my brick. And I know that I need some more washes over here, because this is kind of going around the corner. And that will pick up some of the detail that I already laid down, but it's going to make it more subtle, so it's kind of doing that disappearing edge thing. Which will help it recede. Maybe add a little bit of detail and some just really soft though. And some more Payne's gray up at the top here, because this should actually be quite dark in here. And I will darken also this area because it would be under shadow from these roofs. I'm bringing out those volumes. And I mentioned I was going to shadow in around this table. And actually, probably there would be a bit of shadow cast from those trees also, because of that light. Maybe not so much. I think I will soften it out. Give it a little bit more of a fuzzy look. But same here. There's going to be maybe a little bit of shadow. And in here, I'm going to go a little bit darker. And then the greens. So stay brighter and warmer, or more yellow, in towards where the window is, and sort of random strokes and washes, just to give some detail and some definition. And mostly filling in that shadowed side. And then down in here, and as these sort of move farther and farther around and into shadow, they're going to become even cooler, so I'm going to add some more Payne's Gray to that. I don't want them too dark. If there's too much contrast, they're going to stand out too much. But it also means that I think I need to darken a little bit around the base of that house still. Or I can just let it maybe bleed up a bit. Working on those disappearing edges. And I'm going to shadow a little bit in here again. Because this is all hidden from the light in here. A little bit darker under this table. Not too much though, because that's a little bit intense, so I'm just gonna wipe a little bit of that away for some texture, soften it out, and then maybe some little shadows on those gifts, and then I think we're done. So again, shadows for reds need to be a cooler red. So I just mixed up one of my more blue reds with some Payne's gray. And I'll dab that away because it's a bit intense. And bring some luminosity back in. And then again, a really intense little decoration over here. And I might add a couple extras in there. Different little sizes and kind of hiding out. And with that, I think it is done. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial on painting a Christmas house, and I will see you in the next video.